So, with the release of Chapter 4 of Deltarune, a lot of our burning questions have been answered, but just as many have appeared in their places. Who is the knight, and what does she want? What are Chris and Carol scheming? What's the deal with Friend? Is Ralsei a girl but for real this time? Perhaps most pressingly, though, is the lingering mystery the chapter's Dark World has left us with, and that's the elusive Last Prophecy, the event that concludes the tale of Deltarune that's apparently so appalling that Ralsei spent the whole chapter trying to conceal it from us at all costs, and upon seeing it, Susie smashed it in disbelief. So, what are the contents of this mysterious Last Prophecy that has our heroes so worked into a lather? My immediate thought upon playing was that the heroes had to die, as was many others, and I think that's still a decent contender. Some people have proposed that the Dark Worlds will have to disappear, which initially makes sense until you remember the prophecy says that both worlds will be saved. However, for the sake of this video, the specific event isn't super relevant. Instead, what I want to focus on is whether this event will happen at all. Since the very beginning of the game, Deltarune has been hitting us over the head with this theme of fate. The game begins with our choices being rendered obsolete as we're forced into Chris as our vessel, and like 10 minutes later, Susie delivers the now iconic line. In case you haven't realized yet, your choices don't matter. And indeed, our choices don't seem to really affect that much in the broader narrative. Chapter 4 emphasizes this idea even further with the revelation that, according to Ralsei, every single moment of the prophecy has been clearly delineated already. Kind of. Probably. We'll get back to that. The immediate assumption that I've seen a lot of people make based on Gerson's recurring motif in Chapter 4 of rewriting stories, that the prophecy will be subverted by Susie, or that we're not even on the prophecy track to begin with. Maybe the weird route is even the real prophecy. I think these interpretations make sense, and I understand why they would be people's immediate thoughts. However, I beg to disagree. I don't think that the game will end with the prophecy being subverted. In fact, I think it's thematically imperative that the prophecy does come to pass, and that's precisely because, as Toby Fox said so long ago, there's more important things than reaching the end. Let's get into it. So, I want to start by talking about Gerson a little bit because I think my interpretation differs from the general fandoms. Throughout Chapter 4, Gerson has this running idea of adaptation and the evolution of a story over time, and considering this chapter is about the plot of the game Deltarune, this seems thematically important. Lord of the Hammer, Gerson's novel, was based on the prophecy, and Dragon Blazers, Deltarune's self-insert game, is based on Lord of the Hammer. In his battle, Gerson tells Susie that Lord of the Hammer never got a proper ending and that she holds the pen that can write the final chapter. He also has this line about how they were following the prophecy so closely they couldn't see where they were going. From this, many have interpreted Gerson's words as him telling Susie that she has the power to literally rewrite the ending and stop the last prophecy from coming to pass. However, I think this reading is a little too face value. Think about the nature of adapting a story for a second. If you're turning a book into a movie, or a game in this instance, you keep the core plot points intact, but aspects of the middle will inevitably be tweaked to a greater or lesser extent. Even if those stories do end the same way, these seemingly minor alterations along the way are what tend to make or break adaptations for people. To an extent, this seems to be self-referential. Deltarune wears a lot of its inspiration, such as Mother 3 and Homestuck and Earthbound, very openly on its sleeve, and Toby isn't exactly shy about this fact, much to my chagrin. Deltarune's meta-narrative is a story about stories, after all. Deltarune definitely borrows plot elements from these things, but that doesn't reduce its artistic merit by any means, and that doesn't make people less excited for what else Deltarune has in store. As Gerson says, stories can be retold and rewritten. I mean, think about how enduring of a story archetype the hero's journey is, for instance. Even though they follow the same principal beats, the Odyssey isn't a replacement for the Hunger Games. The middle is what matters. This is also true of Deltarune. While its core beats are similar to that of a standard adventure RPG, prophesied heroes, refusal of the call, hero and their love interest damsel in distress, dark versus light, etc., it diverges from these tropes in the ways that matter, like the fact that the protagonist isn't the hero, and the hero being a girl and gay, and the fact that darkness isn't a necessarily bad thing. Deltarune takes inspiration from a lot of the concepts of Mother 3 and Earthbound, but one is not the same as the other. So, with all of that being said, I think the idea being communicated here isn't that fate can or should be changed, but that isn't what matters. Though they may end the same way, Dragon Blazers isn't a replacement for Lord of the Hammer, just as the journey of Deltarune isn't a replacement for the prophecy. What matters is the minor and major changes that happened along the way that recontextualize the ending. To that end, it's interesting that Susie is the character most actively invested in and associated with changing fate. As has been discussed to death in the fandom already, it's been hinted at since Chapter 1 that Susie is the real hero of Deltarune. But Chapter 4 really drove that idea home, with her little mini-arc with Gerson, the amount of focus given to the girl in the prophecy, which we'll get back to, Gerson telling her she holds the pen that can write the final chapter as opposed to Chris, etc. And why wouldn't she want to change that ending? Since her first adventure in the Dark World, Susie's life has improved exponentially. She finally has friends who understand her, even a romantic interest, and she feels like she has a greater purpose now. Of course it feels like a massive slap in the face to be told that all of that is about to come to an abrupt halt. When Gerson asks her how she wants the story to end, she says that she wouldn't have an ending. After all, isn't it better if things just stay the same forever? Within the last couple chapters, Susie has already had to come to terms with a lot of harsh truths about what she thought she knew about her friends, such as the nature of Dark Worlds and whatever the hell's going on between us and Chris, and Ralse lying about a lot of stuff, but I think this will be the ultimate truth she'll have to face. Gerson isn't telling her that she should or can change the ending, he's preparing her for the idea that even though she can't change the ending, she can change what it means. That's the meaning of her learning healing magic. Her journey is recontextualized through her not just being a brutish DPS, but also a capable healer. Even if that story will always end the same way, even if the final outcome will always be the same, it's important that she wasn't just one thing. She didn't just play one role in that story. As Gerson says, predictability is the biggest vice that a story could have. She shouldn't give up on trying just because her fate is sealed. Gerson's response to Susie choosing eternity always struck me as well. Ain't that something feels as if he's saying, that's a nice thought, and his dialogue after saying that there is only one thing that can override the dark again implies that you can't live in stagnancy. The only way forward is through. You can't live within a realm of fiction forever. It's also important to keep in mind thematically that Gerson is gone, as is the fate of all mortal beings. He passed on, but that doesn't by any means mean that his life had no meaning because it came to an end. He left behind a legacy of works that inspired a generation. Even though Susie wants to bring him back, as is natural, she has to accept that even though he's not physically there anymore, her time with him and what he taught her still absolutely matters. And even though he's not around anymore, it doesn't make those lessons any less valuable. That also ties back to Alvin's daddy issues. He has to realize that his father is gone and he has to choose his own path, regardless of what Gerson would or would not have wanted for him. Building a little on this idea, I want to expand on the theme of stagnancy a little more because that's another reason the last prophecy coming to pass is so thematically imperative. All of our main Lighteners, and to some extent Darkeners, are affected by the idea of wanting to go back to a simpler time, in the past, or for things to stay as they are. For example, King and Tenna are both hung up on feelings that they've been abandoned by the Lighteners. Tenna especially exemplifies this idea, with him literally forcing the gang to play his games indefinitely. Now that he finally has this taste of the past he so desperately yearns for, he's so afraid to let it go. This is the meaning of the snow imagery in TV World. Tenna is trying to literally freeze the past in place. Put a pin in that, by the way. But, as Ralse says, the show's gotten old. Life moves on, kids grow up, but that doesn't mean that his life was pointless. He provided so much happiness to the Dreamers in the holidays, and even to Susie and Ralse. Why did I say her name like that? And even to Susie and Ralse, and that'll never be taken away. Plus, he has a new life with Metatone now, someone who actually currently needs him. It's similar to Susie and her healing magic. Even if eventually they'll have to move on, there's not just one set role for them. Queen, while not suffering from lack of use, at least in the long term, because God knows the internet's not going anywhere anytime soon, similarly demonstrates the idea of stagnancy and escape, but from the Lighteners' perspective. She wants to create a new night because that's what she thinks the Lighteners want, and she's not really wrong, either. Susie, Noelle, and Birdley all remark on how much better they like the Dark World after Queen is defeated. But as Ralse immediately demonstrates, that's an untenable path. We've seen the consequence of diving too deep into the darkness, of overindulging. You can't live in a stagnant state of internet escapism forever. As for the Lighteners, well, it's pretty straightforward. Susie I already went over. Susie naturally fears change. After all, it's apparently all she's ever known, with her constantly moving. And now that she finally has some stability and healthy relationships, she's so scared to lose it. It's no wonder she feels such a kinship with Tenna. They both desperately want to cling to and stay in that moment of peace. She says as much before sealing the third sanctuary. And I just had this thought right now, but Susie is also paralleled to King a lot, who is similar to Tenna in that way. Chris is another example. Throughout the game, it's constantly being hammered into them that their time as a child is running out. Playing with toys and watching TV, running around playing pretend in the woods with their friends, having hot chocolate with their brother, all of that is about to come to an end. The ultimate culmination of this is, of course, Sans, as that's the biggest indicator that things will never go back to how they used to be. Toriel's moved on, and they feel as if she's left them in the dust, while they pick up the pieces of their parents' divorce, Dessa's disappearance, Asriel leaving, and everything else that's changed. The same idea is true of Asgore with his constant pining for Toriel, and we'll probably see more of that expanded on in Chapter 5. The soul also represents this. We're quite literally pushing Chris along in their life, even when they don't want to. Meta-narratively, that's why they resist us entering the shelter and mantle. It's because they don't want to confront that past trauma and move on. Same for the art therapy minigame. It shows an unwillingness to confront the past and what actually happened. Of course, though, the ultimate embodiments of Deltarune's themes of nostalgia and stagnancy are Noelle and Carol. Noelle spends so much of Chapter 2 yearning for the past and reminiscing on the old days with her sister and friends. And while there's been a lot of jokes about how funny it is that Noelle, wants Chris to prank her, like they did when they were kids, but a lot of their pranks were just them actually just being mean, I think that it goes beyond the running joke that Noelle is turned on by scary things. Noelle yearns for a past that's actively harmful for her. Living in the past is not good for her, and we'll get back to that later with the weird route. And as for Carol, the main antagonist Lightner thus far, the knight only half counts because she's clearly not a normal Lightner anymore, this is even more the case. Carol has an obsession with preserving everything, including her daughters. We see this with the cast iron snowflakes and the fact that she keeps everything important at her house. Hell, her entire main motif is ice. She literally wants to freeze over her life, keep it preserved as it is. And, like Noelle, why wouldn't she? Of course she wants to go back to that simpler past when her husband wasn't dying and her daughter wasn't a domestic terrorist. Carol, more than anyone, is most afraid of time progressing. And, what is her goal with the night? Her role in the conspiracy is probably the most mystifying thus far. Stuffed Alpaca, in her video about gender in Deltarune, mentioned this, and I think it is true that whatever her goal is, Carol's main objective is to free Des from the clutches of the knight persona. However, he also brings up the idea that it's thematically imperative that Carol herself doesn't succeed in regaining control over Des. That isn't to say that it's good that Des is a domestic terrorist, but that's not Carol's call to make. If Des is Asriel's age, she's a young woman now. Her life under the jurisdiction of her parents is over, no matter what Carol wants for her. If and when Des is freed from the clutches of the night, it's her call to decide what she wants her future to be. Sorry, I just had this thought, but I'm thinking about the fact that Des is associated with water, as she's from the depths, and Carol's associated with ice, so again you have this idea of Carol literally trying to freeze her in place. I don't know, I thought that was just some interesting imagery going on that I haven't seen anyone mention before. Which brings me back to the weird route. Sorry, I can't help myself. The weird route seems to stem from our desperate desire to find another ending and to subvert our destiny, us doing whatever it takes at any cost to find that elusive second ending, and that too is the meaning of the ice imagery. In addition to being because reindeer, winter, and a pun about computers freezing when they stop working, I'd like to remind you that Carol, who, as we've established, is the ultimate embodiment of nostalgia and the fear of life going on, is also the one directly linked to ice. While I doubt Carol is aware of the extent of what we're doing in the weird route, at least I sincerely hope that she isn't, the weird route is kind of the Carol route in a way. It's implicitly condoned by her in the ending of Chapter 4. All that matters as it pertains to her is that it makes Chris and Noelle easier to wrap around her finger. Noelle, in harnessing her ice powers, like her mother, is freezing time in place, stopping us from progressing towards the inevitable ending. But that's the thing. She's only slowing the trek to the ending, not changing what will happen. Again, being trapped in the past is shown to be bringing her pain, and this time it's actual physical pain, not just emotional. This seems to be even further emphasized with Chapter 4 showing that Noelle seems to be, gaslighting herself into thinking that we're actually good for her. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Chapter 2 has the most weird route relevance thus far and is where it starts, because creepy stuff on the internet is a source of nostalgia for Noelle. She even describes Spampton's gross trash house as nostalgic. This is another meaning of the pushing of Chris L in that route. Not the gross trash house, I mean the nostalgia thing. Chris for Noelle represents those feelings of childhood nostalgia. As I said before, when they're reconnecting in Chapter 2, she spends a lot of her dialogue reminiscing on the days spent with her siblings, and recalling her and Chris's childhood days spent teasing one another. Conversely, as I established in my Suselle video, Susie and Noelle represent positive change for each other. Susie is something new and exciting for Noelle, someone who's willing to break the ice and free her from living in the past, which, again, is shown with her defying Carol so openly. And Noelle, likewise, is a positive change for Susie, someone who shows her that she is both worthy and capable of love. The prophecy, the direct embodiment of inevitable change, also shows that. These two are moving each other along in a positive and healthy way. Sorry for making this into another Suselle video, I just love them. Anyway, Chris being pushed as her romantic interest in the weird route is yet even more imagery showing how she's frozen in the past, especially when it's in this very mutually destructive way. I think it's possible and even likely that Chris and Noelle did have feelings for each other when they were kids, but that childhood time is over. Again, lingering in the past is untenable, and eventually Noelle will have to awaken from her darker yet darker dream. All that matters is how rude of an awakening that will be. And, regardless, we're setting her up for a likes of which the world has never seen before crash out, the consequences of which could be disastrous. This might be kind of an abrupt change of subject, but let's talk about Gaster a little bit. Just stick with me here. Even though it's been 10 years, Gaster is still such an enigma, and his role in the overall story of Deltarune is still so shrouded in mystery. Chapters 3 and 4 gave us our first non-Twitter dialogue from him in years, one of which was just a very neutral commendation of our ability to play video game, but we'll get back to the other one later. A few months ago, I watched a really interesting video by Chris Roomba about why Gaster is that I'll put in the iCard. Essentially, they compare Gaster to Flowey, an antagonist introduced at the very beginning of the game whose ideology we as the player must either confront or comply with. They then go on to say that in the weird route we're essentially being a mad scientist, i.e. Gaster, pushing the game to its very limits, testing different things to see if we can get a different outcome, regardless of the ethics of it, thus making the weird route more or less the quote-unquote Gaster route, similar to how the No Mercy route in Undertale is the quote-unquote Flowey route. So I want to expand on this idea a little bit. If the weird route is the Gaster route, then it stands to reason that Gaster too is interested in subverting fate, and all that lines up with all of his talk of creating a new future with us, the future being in our hands, etc. The most glaring example of this gameplay-wise is when he'll intervene when you lose to the knight, offering you a chance to fight her again, and he'll even encourage you to keep fighting if you make it to her final attack. By all accounts, this is a fight that you should lose. This is an unbeatable opponent, but Gaster encourages us to challenge her nonetheless. Importantly, though, this is once again just delaying the inevitable. Whether or not you beat her, Susie and Ralsei will still be swooned, and the flavor text when you manage to survive her gauntlet with no damage taken implies that she was just playing chicken with us anyway. And honestly, this shouldn't come as a shock. This community has basically gaslit itself with memes into thinking the knight isn't basically God, but I digress. Even if Gaster gives us all the time in the world, the outcome will still be the same. So, then, the question we're asked is whether we should bend this world's laws to its very limits in a futile attempt to find another ending. It doesn't even matter if that ending is a good one or not, or if it's worse than the alternative. When talking about the shelter, the representation of Gaster, Alfie says whatever's in there might be worse than what's out here, and I think that's a really important line. Maybe the new ending that we'd be led toward is worse than the one that we get if we just follow the prophecy to its conclusion. Also recording this, I'm pretty sure Ralsei also has a line about that. It's kind of similar to Undertale's major question in that way, asking how much is enough and questioning how far we're willing to go and how much we're willing to depersonalize from a work of fiction to see all that it has to offer. And the answer to this question, should we break everything for a different outcome, is emphatically no. Does that mean we should just throw up our hands and apathetically march on towards our unshakable destiny? Well, if I haven't made that clear already, absolutely not. And the character that will have to learn that lesson, that just because an ending is predetermined doesn't mean that you should abandon all hope, is Ralsei. It's no secret that Ralsei has some very serious self-esteem issues related to his belief in the ephemeral nature of Darkners. And here's where my opinion somewhat differs from others. I don't think Ralsei is necessarily wrong, sorry that sounds mean. I sincerely doubt the story Toby is trying to tell us is that it's good to only indulge in fantasies of one's own making, actually. This game is, in my opinion, a Bildungsroman first and foremost, and part of that means leaving behind the fantasies of childhood and entering the adult world. Ralsei buries his nihilism, stemming from his knowledge, with toxic positivity and forcing himself to put on a smile. Knowing how his story ends, but that Susie doesn't know, he puts aside his own feelings and desires to ensure that the story isn't ruined for her, and she too isn't burdened by knowledge. But what Ralsei fails to consider is that even if eventually the gang will have to step into the light, that doesn't take away from the value of the Dark World and their journey. Even if that story will always end the same way, and Chris and Susie will have to grow up, and Ralsei will become obsolete, it doesn't mean that their journey means nothing. That's the irony of Ralsei telling Susie to make some real friends. Aside from just being really rude, she has made real friends in Chris and Noelle and Birdley. Well, kind of, on that last one. And if she hadn't gone to the Dark World and the prophecy came to pass without any of their adventures having happened, how would their story end? Susie and Chris would still be grouchy, friendless loners, Noelle and Ralsei would still be doormats, and Birdley would still be an insecure dickhead. Well, again, TBD there. Even if that story does have to end, everyone has been positively affected by the Dark Worlds, and that's time worth cherishing. The fact that Susie now cares so much about the last prophecy proves that this journey has already shaped her in an irreversible way. In Chapter 1, she flippantly remarks on how it seems fun to watch the world come to an end, whereas she admonishes the knight for the same attitude in Chapter 4. It's been really interesting to watch the fandom kind of grow alongside her. In Chapter 1, we all kind of threw up our hands and said, well, I guess there is only one ending. But in Chapter 4, now there's such an influx of theories about how, actually, we will change fate, we are going to find a different ending, there's multiple endings. When you become immersed in a story, it's hard to say goodbye, but what matters equally is why you care so much in the first place. Eventually, the last prophecy will come to pass. All stories have to come to an end, and everyone has to grow up. but that doesn't mean a story is defined by its ending. Maybe, factually, Ralsei's story will always end the same way, and Chris and Susie will always have to grow up. But that doesn't undermine the amount of joy and love he brought into their lives, which is something that they will always carry with them forever. And they appreciate Ralsei for what he is, not a facsimile of what he thinks he should be. Even if he hasn't changed fate himself, he's changed what that ending means. Because, after all, there's more important things than reaching the ending. Did you like that zinger? I thought it was pretty good. Thank you so much for watching. As I was writing this, I was hit with the revelation that Deltarune itself, too, has an inevitable ending that is in the not-so-distant future, and that hit especially hard in the wake of both Undertale's 10th anniversary and Chapter 2's 4-year anniversary. Speaking of which, 10 years of Undertale, that is truly insane. I haven't discussed it as much on the channel since before Chapter 4 came out, but aside from FNAF, Undertale and Deltarune as a franchise have also irrevocably affected me. This series has changed my perspective on what games as a medium can be or do. Undertale was also one of the first games I ever played to have Ganon gay and trans characters, and to have that in such an amazing and influential game really did make me realize that there is no shame in being queer. That scene with those gay royal guards, permanently changed my brain chemistry, I'm pretty sure. As I write this, we're a couple days out from the anniversary Let's Play, which I am awaiting with bated breath to see who triumphs in the legendary battle of Gaster vs. Tokor. And as of recording this, the first stream has happened, and the second one is ongoing as I speak, and oh boy, was that first one crazy. Baby Noelle and Mama Bird were not on my bingo card. As for my own channel, though, holy Kunkadero, my last video took the hell off. It surpassed 100,000 views, and I even got a mention by CamiBoyG, who is definitely one of my favorite Delta tubers. Also, I'm so sorry, Ali Dreamer, for subconsciously plagiarizing your thumbnail. I genuinely did not mean to. It must have come across my recommended at one point, and I just filed it away in my brain, and then later when I was making the thumbnail for that video, I was like, that would be a good idea. I had this totally original thought, stemming from nothing. Obviously not. Anyway, now we're mutuals on Twitter, and they had super nice things to say in the comments of my last video, so thank you so much. Go check out their content, it's really good. They cover a lot of fun, esoteric stuff like I do. In related news, my sub count also increased by 1,000 within a month, which, again, insane. I seriously cannot thank you guys enough. You've turned this silly hobby of mine into something I can make actual money off of, so thank you for funding my gender-affirming care and my law school bills. I also got my first Ko-Fi donation on a similar note, which is so incredible. This one comes from WaveCD, who sent me this lovely write-up about my Suselle video, sharing some of their thoughts and asking for more of my own. It makes me so happy to receive a message from someone who is, by their own admission, not queer asking about queer subjects. A lot of straight and especially cis people immediately go on the defensive nowadays when we talk about queer issues, so it was such a breath of fresh air to get a message from someone who is genuinely curious about learning more about my community. Again, thanks so much to WaveCD, your support is so genuinely appreciated, and I really liked your write-up. As for what I plan to do next, hopefully this time I'll stop lying about doing that FNAF video. I finally found a decent framework for it. It's not going to center mainly on Secret of the Mimic, but will be used as a good launchpad. Also, have you guys been keeping up with this Abyss thing that's been going on Twitter? Because I am super excited for it, especially because it looks like my girl Vanessa is coming back. So hopefully there's going to be more info on that by the time this goes up. Other than that, though, thank you so much for your support. If you like this video, then maybe leave a like or a comment or even consider subscribing if you're feeling a bit frisky, and I will see you guys all in the next one. Bye-bye!